The
Yeah.
Z6's autofocus is very close to a Z8, if not basically the same.
So, me and Jared Polin had a great talk, which will come out soon. Since the video was so long, I decided to cut content from it. Here is probably the only time we really went into gear. Enjoy.
So I have to take that responsibility on. And, you know, when I say the things I said about you're a Nikon shooter, the things I've been saying about Nikon for 5 years, it's all backed and supported by fact and by real world experience and real world examples, and proven time and time again. The whole autofocus thing, how many times have they tried to improve it? Every time they put out a firmware, it's like, we're improving autofocus. And how many times did I say that you're not going to improve autofocus by firmware alone?
Right.
It needs to be it needs to be hardware. And then the Z9 comes out and you're like, yeah, that's better autofocus. The Z8, that's better autofocus. The Z6iii, that's shit autofocus. The Z6iii, that's better autofocus because it actually does the thing that it needs to do. It's not the best in the industry, but it's the best autofocus you've ever seen beyond a DSLR that anybody's ever created. So it's just like, you know, I say these things for years, and then all of a sudden people at some point are like, oh, you were right all along. Well, no shit, I was right all along.
I'm gonna be honest, I was one of those people. But the reason why is because, like I said before, I didn't shoot on the other brands, right? So when I'm only shooting on Nikon, it's like, I'm like, well, this isn't so bad. So Nikon sent me a Z8, and then I just purchased a Z8 afterwards. So I still got to get this Z8 back in like August. But when I used that coming from my Z7iii, I was like, oh, wow, yeah, he was right. You know what I mean? It was like, he was right because you use these other cameras to have something to compare it to where I didn't. So, yeah.
That's what I've said for years. I'm the only one there's very few people in the world that have had every single camera for the last 10 years and know the ins and outs of them. Nikon, Canon, Sony. I mean, I've used the Fujis, I've used whatever, but the three big ones, I've used every camera in the last at least 10, well, since I started YouTube 14 years ago, but we'll say in the last decade, I've used every single brand new camera that's come out, and I understand their systems in and out, so I know what works, I know what doesn't work. And so when I say that the Nikon autofocus is inferior to Canon and to Sony, and I show you the fucking results, and people still want to tell you you're wrong, you can't tell me I'm wrong until you actually pick up the cameras and you see it. Right. And when you see it, you're like, oh, he was right. So that shit doesn't bother me. People can talk all the shit they want. I know what's real. I've proven it in real world situations.
So I got one
That's why it's important. Well, that's why it's important that you branch out and learn other systems.
True.
Especially if you want to grow on YouTube, you build a bigger audience of people that are paying attention when you pick up that other gear. And you use the fact that I don't shoot Sony, I don't shoot Canon, but you know what? I want to try this out. People talk about how good this is. Why don't we learn together as a community? And I'm going to walk through the pros and cons and the ups and downs of learning a new system. Oh, you know, this is interesting. And then that makes people engaged to watch it. Right. And if you come back and you're like, well, Nikon's still what I like to use, so be it. Right. But at least you know the other stuff. And you don't have to be an expert today. But you at least say, I am starting today learning this. Why don't you join me for this journey? A Nikon shooter learning how to use this other gear.
Right.
Period.
So, and this is just because we haven't spoke about gear, so this doesn't have to be extra long. But what do you think it would be smart for Nikon to do next? Would it be making the mirrorless equivalent to the D500 or a high megapixel Z7 III?
Why?
Why for which one?
Why? No, it's just like, why do you need a Z7 III? Where are you going to price that at? You're $2,500 or $2,600 for a Z6 III. You're $4,000 for a Z8. Mm-hmm. Why are you going to try to squeeze in more? Who needs more megapixels? This discussion about megapixels recently with the R1 coming out, not trying to defend 24, but 24 is plenty. We shot 12. We shot 8. I shot 4 with the D2H. And yeah, 4 is not a lot of fucking megapixels. A 24 is plenty. If you know what you're doing, even if you don't know what you're doing, you don't need to crop everything. I need to get into that discussion, but Nikon's doing a very good job. The Z8 and Z9. I mean, anybody that bought a Z9 should be really upset about a Z8. Other than the Z9's better in terms of body, but it's the exact same camera. That is so weird. It's just weird.
It's weird that a Z9 is 45 megapixels. That's what's weird to me. That's the only thing that's weird to me. It shouldn't be that high. If you look at the other flagship
people would bitch.
cameras.
Yeah, but the A1 is 50 and does 30 frames a second. Right? So we can't, like, everything's going to have its pros and cons. The R1's going to have 24 megapixels, but it has the greatest autofocus I've ever seen up to this time. And it's going to shoot fast, not as fast as an A9 III. And so when you start looking at you put these things under a microscope in comparison, you're like, well, it's hard to call the R1 a flagship when it's basically an R3 Mark II, which is exactly what I said, because it's an incremental update.
Right.
It compares better as an R3 Mark II, and that's fine. But when you look at an A9 III and what that's capable of doing, you're like, fuck, that shoots 120 frames a second. You're going to call this your flagship, and that's not a flagship, and you can't do that. So that's just being straight up, like, just pointing out the facts.
Right. So basically, the Z equivalent of a D500 is what you think the next move should be. Oh,
absolutely
no.
not. I hated the D500. A crop sensor camera? Why in this day and age do we need a crop sensor camera? You don't need a crop sensor camera. And I don't want to hear, oh, but it's for shooting wildlife and I could reach in. Just you have 45 megapixels with a Z8. You turn it into DX mode or you crop after the fact, you still have plenty of megapixels. True. I rather have a 24 megapixel full frame Z6iii than a 32 or a 40 megapixel fast shooting crop sensor camera.
So what's
the quality is going to be shit.
So what do you feel should be next? No, I know you may not know what's next, but so you think the lineup is perfect the way it is right now?
No, this is perfect, but the Z6iii is a great camera. The Z8 is a great offering. The Z9's a great offering. I think the Z30 is stupid. It doesn't have an EVF. I don't know about crop sensor cameras.
Listen, it's beautiful. I had it. I sold it. But it's beautiful. It just doesn't shoot 10-bit.
It's not beautiful.
For a creator, for a new
It doesn't
creator.
have an EVF. The autofocus is shit until you put in the Z6iii's auto. No, you know it's shit.
No,
I shot the
compared to my Z8, you're correct.
No, but even compared to a Z6 now, the Z6's autofocus is very close to a Z8, if not basically the same. Right. Very close.
Yeah.
But competent. The ZFC, not competent. The ZF, is that the full frame one? The ZF, that's more competent. That has a newer focusing system. That started the progression of now, hey, look, the shit focuses. So you can't say that for a creator to get a Z30, doesn't have an EVF, has shitty autofocus, it's not great.